wizards like Gandalf and of good friends like Elrond go astray. Sometimes when you are off on dangerous adventures over the edge of the wild, and Gandalf was a wise enough wizard to know it. He knew that something unexpected might happen, and that he hardly dared to hope that they would pass without fearful adventure over those great tall mountains with lonely peaks and valleys where no king ruled. They did not. All was well until one day they met a thunderstorm. More than a thunderstorm, a thunder battle. You know how terrific a really big thunderstorm can be down in the land and in a river valley, especially at times with two grand thunderstorms meet and clash. More terrible still are thunder and lightning in the mountains at night when storms come up from the east and west and make war. The lightning splinters on the peaks, and rocks shiver, and great crashes split the air and go rolling and tumbling into every cave and hollow, and the darkness is filled with overwhelming noise and sudden light. Bilbo had never seen or imagined anything of the kind. They were high up in a narrow place, with a dreadful fall into a dim valley at one side of them. They were sheltering under a hanging rock for the night, and he lay beneath the blanket and shook from head to toe. When he peeped out in the lightning flashes, he saw that across the valley the stone giants were out and were hurling rocks at one another for a game, and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness, where they smashed among the trees far below, or splintered into little bits with bang. Then came a wind and a rain, and the wind whipped, and the rain and the hail battered in every direction, so that an overhanging rock was no protection at all. Soon they were getting drenched, and their ponies were standing with their heads down and their tails between their legs, and some of them were whining with fright. They could hear the giants coughing and shouting all over the mountainsides. "This won't do at all," said Thorin. "If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we shall be picked up by some giant and kicked sky high for a football." "Well, if you know anywhere better, take us there," said Gandalf, who was feeling very grumpy and was far from happy about the giants himself. The end of the argument was they sent Billy and Gilly to look for a better shelter. They had very sharp eyes, and being the youngest of the dwarves by some 50 years, they usually got some sort of jobs. There's nothing like looking if you want to find something. You certainly usually find something if you look, but it's not always quite the something you were after. So it proved on this occasion. Soon Billy and Gilly came crawling back, holding on to the rocks and the wind. "We found a dry cave," they said, "not far round the corner, and ponies all could get inside." "Have you thoroughly explored it?" said the wizard, who knew that caves in the mountains were seldom unoccupied. Yes, they said, though everybody knew they could not have been long about it. They had come back too quick. It isn't all that big, and it does not go far back. That, of course, is the dangerous part about caves. You don't know how far they get back, sometimes, or where a passage behind may lead to, or what is waiting for you inside. But now Billy and Gilly's news seemed good enough, so they got up and prepared to move. The wind was howling and the thunder still growling, and they had business getting themselves and their ponies along. Still, it was not very far to go, and not before the long they came to a big rock standing out into the path. If you stepped behind, you found a low arch in the side of the mountain. There was just room to get the ponies through with a squeeze when they had been unpacked and unsaddled. As they passed under the arch, it was good to hear the wind and the rain outside instead of all about them, and to feel safe from the giants and the rocks. But the wizard was taking no risk. He lit up his wand, as he did that day in Bilbo's dining room that seemed so long ago, if you remember, and by its light it explored the cave from end to end. It seemed quite a fair size, but not too large and mysterious, This moment did not seem so impossible, so they dropped off to sleep, one by one. And that was the last time they used their ponies, baggage, tool, and paraphernalia that they had brought with them. It turned out a good thing that night that they had brought little Bilbo with them, after all, for somehow he could not go to sleep for a long while, and when he did, he had nasty dreams. He'd dream that a crack in the wall at the back of the cave got bigger and bigger and opened wider and wider. He was very afraid, but could not call out or do anything but lie and look. Then he dreamed that the floor of the cave was giving away, and that he was slipping, beginning to fall down, goodness knows where to. At that he woke up with a horrible start, and found that part of his dream was true. A crack had opened in the back of the cave, and was already a wide passage. He was just in time to see the last of the ponies' tails disappearing into it. Of course, he had a great, very loud a yell as a hobbit could give, which is surprising for their size. Out jumped goblins, big goblins, great, ugly-looking goblins, lots of goblins, before you could say rocks and blocks. There were 6 to each dwarf at least, and 2 even for Bilbo. They were all grabbed and carried through the crack before they could say tinder and flint. But not Gandalf. Bilbo's yell had done that much good. It had wakened him up, white in a splintered second, and when goblins came to grab him, there was a terrific flash like lightning in the cave, a smell like gunpowder, and several of them fell dead. The crack closed with a step, and Bilbo and the dwarves were on the wrong side of it. Where was Gandalf? Of that neither they nor the goblins had any idea, and the goblins did not wait to find out. They seized Bilbo and the dwarves and hurried them along. It was deep, deep dark, such as only goblins have taken living in the heart of the mountains can see through. The passages that were crossed and tangled in all directions, but the goblins knew their way as well as you do to the nearest post office, and the way went down and down, and it was most horribly stuffy. The goblins were very rough and pinched unmercifully. They chuckled and laughed in the horrible stony voices, and Bilbo was more unhappy even than when the troll had picked him by his toes. He wished again and again for his nice bright hobbit hole, not for the last time. Now there came a glimmer of a red light before them. The goblins began to sing or croak, keeping time with the flap of their flat feet on the stone, and shaking their prisoners as well. Clap, snap, the black crack, grip, grab, pinch, nab, and down, down to goblin down you go, my lad. Clash, crash, crush, mash, hammer and tongs, knocker and gongs, pound, pound, far underground, oh, my lad. Swish, smack, whip, crack, better and beat, yammer and bleat, work, work, nor dare to smirk, while goblins quaff and goblins laugh, round and round for underground, below, my lad. It sounded truly terrifying, the walls echoing to the clap, snap, and the crush, and the smash, and to the ugly laughter of their ho, ho, my lad. The general meaning of the song was too plain, for now the goblins took out whips and whipped them with the swish smack, and set them up running as fast as they could in front of them, and more than one of the dwarves were already yambling and bleeding like anything when they stumbled into this big cavern. It was lit by a great red fire in the middle, and by the torches along the walls, and it was full of goblins. They laughed and stamped and clapped their hands when the dwarves came running in, while the goblin drivers whopped and cracked their whips behind. The ponies were already there, huddled in a corner, and they were all there with the packages, and the packages lying broken open and being rummaged by goblins, and smelled by the goblins, and fingered by goblins, and quarreled over by goblins. I'm afraid this was the last day they ever saw those excellent ponies, including a jolly sturdy They make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any but the most skilled dwarves. When they take the trouble, though, they're usually untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture. They make very well, or get other people to make to their design. Prisoners and slaves that have to work till they die for want of air and light. It is unlikely they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once. For wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days, in those wild parts, they had not advanced so far. They did not hate dwarves especially, no more than they hated everybody and everything, and particularly the orderly and prosperous, in some parts wicked dwarves had even made alliances with them. But they had a special grudge against Thorin's people because of the war which you had mentioned, but which does not come into these tales. And anyway, goblins don't care who they catch, as long as it's done smart and secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves. Who are these miserable persons? Said the great goblin. Dwarves, and this, said one of the drivers, pulling up at Bilbo's chain, so that he fell forward onto his knees. We found them sheltering in our front porch. What do you mean by it? Said the great goblin, turning to Thorin. Up to no good, I'll warrant, spying on the private businesses of my people, I guess. Thieves, I shouldn't be surprised to learn. Murderers and friends of elves, not unlikely. Come, what do you've got to say? Thorin, the dwarf at your service, he replied. It was merely a polite nothing of the things which you suspect and imagine. We had no idea at all. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed a convenient cave and unused. Nothing was further from our thoughts than inconveniencing goblins in any other way. That was true enough, said the great goblin. So you say. Might I ask what you were doing in the mountains at all, and where you were coming from, and where you were going to? In fact, I should like to know all about you. Not that it'll do you much good, Thorin Oakenshield. I know too much about your folk already, but let's have the truth, or I'll prepare something particularly uncomfortable for you. course it was Gandalf, but just then they were too busy to ask how he got there. He took out his sword again, and again it flashed in the dark by itself. It burned with a rage that made it gleam if goblins were about. Now it was a bright blue flame, for the delight in the killing of the great lord of the cave. It made no trouble whatever or cutting through the goblins' chains and setting all through the prisoners free as quickly as possible. This sword's name was Glamdring the Foehammer, if you remember. The goblins just called it Beater and hated it worse than the Biter if possible. Orcris, too, had been saved for Gandalf, had brought it along as well, snatching it from one of the terrified guards. Gandalf thought of most things, and though he could not do everything, he could do a great deal for friends in a tight corner. "Are we all here?" said he, handing his sword back to Thorin with a bow. "Let me see. 1, that's Thorin. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Where are Philly and Gilly? Here they are, 12, 13, and here's Mr. Baggins, 14. Well, it might be worse, then again it might be a good deal better. No ponies, no food, no knowing quite where we are, and hordes of angry goblins just behind. On we go." And on they went. Gandalf was quite right. They began to hear goblin noises and horrible cries from behind in the passages they had come through. That sent them on faster than ever, and as poor Bilbo could not possibly go half a speed, for dwarves could roll along at a tremendous pace, I can tell you when they have to, they took it in to carry him on their backs. Still, goblins go faster than dwarves, and these dwarves knew the way better, and they were madly angry, so that they could do the dwarves heard the cries and howls getting closer and closer. Soon they could hear even the flap of the goblin feet, many, many feet, which seemed only just round that last corner. The blink of red torches could be seen behind them in the tunnel. They were getting deadly tired. "Why, oh why did I ever leave my hobbit hole?" said poor Baggins, bumping up and down on Bumper's back. "Why, oh why did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt?" said poor Bumper, who was fat and staggering along with the sweat dripping down his nose in his heat and terror. At this point, Gandalf fell behind and Thorin with him. They turned a sharp corner. "About turn," he shouted. "Draw your sword, Thorin." There was nothing else to do, and the goblins did not like it. They came scurrying round the corner in full cry and found goblin cleaver and foehammer shining cold and bright right in their astonished eyes. The ones in front dropped their torches and gave one yell before they were killed. The ones behind yelled still more and leaped back, knocking over those that were running after them. "Biter and Peter," they shrieked, and soon they were all in confusion, and most of them were hustling back the way they had come. It was quite a long while before any of them dared to turn that corner. By that time the dwarves had gone again a long, long way into the dark tunnels of the goblin realm. When the goblins' way into the dark tunnels that poured out of the touches and slipped out of the soft shoes, they chose that they find the quickest runners with the sharpest ears and eyes. These ran forward as swift as weasels in the dark, and with hardly any more noises than bats. That's why neither Bilbo nor the dwarves nor even Gandalf heard any of them coming, nor did they see him. But they were seen by the goblins that ran silently up behind them, for Gandalf was letting his wand give out a faint light to help the dwarves as they went along. Quite suddenly,